While dumb criminals out there are a dime a dozen, it's hard to ignore that a lot of crimes are conducted so badly that the average person can't fathom how they thought they would get away with it. It's even more rare that a criminal is so monumentally stupid that psychologists actually study their thought process. We've shown dumb criminals on this channel before, a whole lot of them actually. But it's not often that a criminal is so profoundly stupid that they're studied by psychologists and go on to inspire a whole new term in the study of psychology as a whole. Let's get into just how that happened. Back in the far-off year of 1995, two men, MacArthur Wheeler and Clifton Earl Johnson, decided they wanted to rob some banks. In order to do so, they felt that they needed the perfect disguise. That's where MacArthur got an idea. If invisible ink can't be seen, what if you could make your face invisible? He thought that, since you can use lemon juice as invisible ink, it might make anything it touches invisible to cameras. Being that it was a bit of a leap in logic, MacArthur decided to put his new theory to the test. He began to vigorously rub lemon juice all over his face. He noted that it was burning his face and his eyes, causing him to have trouble with his vision. He had to squint to even see, but he decided to power through regardless. He then took out a Polaroid camera, turned it around, and took a picture of his face to see if it really worked. To his surprise, it did. There was nothing on the photo. However, it was later highly suspected that MacArthur simply made a mistake while taking the photo. It's believed that, either due to the lemon juice in his eyes making it difficult to see, or his own stupidity, probably both, MacArthur pointed the camera away from his face while taking the photo. If one were to be generous, you could argue that it might have been a mistake in the film or the lens of the camera being misaligned, but it's far more likely that MacArthur simply missed. Fully confident that he had discovered a real-life cheat code, MacArthur and Clifton were more than ready to head out and rob some banks. On the afternoon of January 6, 1995, they set out on their mission. One bank they robbed was at the Fidelity Savings Bank in the Brighton Heights area of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. With Arthur taking the lead in the crimes, they proceeded on to the Swissvale branch of Mellon Bank. In broad daylight, with no disguise, MacArthur approached the counter with a handgun while Clifton waited in line behind him. MacArthur demanded some money from the teller, waving his gun around while doing so. With the lemon juice on his face and burning his eyes, he felt empowered. No camera could even see him. He had already won. Getting about $5,200 from the heist, they made a break for it and left the building. Altogether, they got about $8,900 in total from both of the robberies. The police came out to the bank and asked to see the security camera footage. There they found a lot of images of MacArthur, his face clear as day. With a clear photo of his face and his 5'6", 270-pound stature, he wasn't exactly the kind of guy that would blend into a crowd if people were looking for him. A few months later, they decided to broadcast his photo and the details of the case on a local TV show called Pittsburgh Crime Stoppers, and it was actually only a matter of minutes before MacArthur was identified as the man in the photo. Less than an hour after the show was broadcast, the police were making their way out to MacArthur to arrest him. When they approached him, he said that he wasn't the man who robbed that bank, fully confident that they had no evidence against him. When the police presented his photograph from the security camera footage and asked, "Is this you?" he was floored. All the color drained from his face as he screamed, "But I wore the lemon juice! I wore the lemon juice!" as the cops threw him into the back of their car. It wasn't too long before they were on Clifton's trail as well. Once he was arrested and went to trial, Clifton didn't only plead guilty to the robberies they knew of, he also admitted to committing some robberies the year prior in 1994 as well. While doing so, he testified against MacArthur, sealing his fate. While Clifton got a 5-year prison sentence for himself, he really only acted as backup during the robberies. Given that MacArthur had been the main participant, he was hit much more harshly. He was given a 24.5-year prison sentence. After the two went to jail, a summary of the robberies was published in the 1996 edition of the World Almanac. A man named David Dunning, who was a professor of social psychology at Cornell University at the time, came to stumble upon the story that way. Intrigued, he decided to look more into the case, checking out a few local newspapers from the Pittsburgh area at the time. While reading about the case, Dunning was hit with inspiration. He began to formulate a theory. He later explained his thought process, saying, "If MacArthur Wheeler was too stupid to be a bank robber, perhaps he was also too stupid to know that he was too stupid to be a bank robber. That is, his stupidity protected him from an awareness of his own stupidity. Dunning decided to get the help of a graduate student named Justin Kruger to organize a research program to prove whether or not this theory had any merit. They wanted to see whether someone's perception of their own competence could be measured against their actual competence. They ended up publishing their study in 1999. The paper included the line, "Not only do they reach erroneous conclusions and make unfortunate choices, but their incompetence robs them of the ability to realize it. Instead, like Mr. Wheeler, they are left with the mistaken impression that they are doing just fine." This study came to be what is called the Dunning-Kruger effect, a psychological effect that is still brought up today whenever someone acts in a similar manner. Dunning and Kruger weren't even the only people to come to study MacArthur Wheeler. R. Lofton Hudson, who was both a pastor and a psychologist, came to take an interest in him as well. He said that this could be happening to anyone and they wouldn't even know, saying, "We mistakenly and uncritically believe in our relational skill set when in reality these skills may be no more effective than Mr. Wheeler's special cream." While I wouldn't really call it a special cream because, yeah, the fact still stands that MacArthur's stupidity was to such an extent that he would go down in history, being labeled by name in psychology books all over the world. Ever since then, we've seen the Dunning-Kruger effect play out in many different cases in real time. Let's look into the story of Matthew Allen McNally and Joey Lee Miller. Matthew, who was 23 at the time, and Joey, who was 20, were a couple of goofballs that were engaging in some goofballery. They were both seen by a witness who called the police, saying that the two men were attempting to break into a man's apartment in Carroll, Iowa. While the police were told during the call that there were two men in hoodies with paint on their face, it was actually much weirder than that. Matthew and Joey had simply taken some black markers and drawn squiggles all over their faces. Needless to say, having some lines on your face doesn't really do a whole lot to hide your identity. The police went out to the area, coming across a car along the way that matched the description of their suspect's car. The cops pulled the car over, finding the two young men covered in marker inside. Not only were they dumb, the two were both fairly drunk as well. They arrested the two men at gunpoint as they had just attempted a robbery moments before. As it turns out, they had even used permanent marker, meaning the police couldn't even get it off for their mugshots. A police officer called the two men Dumb and Dumber, leading to the media running with that moniker. It was widely agreed upon that these were the worst disguises ever. Jokingly, the local police chief said, "We are very skilled investigators, and the black faces gave them right away." To a local radio show, he added, "I've been the chief here almost 25 years, been with the department 28 and a half years, and I've seen a lot of things that make me laugh and weird things, but this was probably the best combination of the two. Strangely weird and hilariously funny all at the same time. I mean, just the face thing is what sets it apart." Both of the two were charged with attempted burglary, with Matthew getting an extra charge of driving while intoxicated. The charges were later lowered to attempted second-degree burglary and the two were released on bail. After a while, the judge just dismissed the case against them entirely, saying that there was no physical evidence that they were trying to break in anywhere. Given that there was no real evidence and that neither of them had a weapon and nobody was injured, they just kinda let it go. Those two weren't even the only ones to try out this sort of disguise, which brings us to the case of a Florida man, maybe? In Holiday, Florida, at the Holiday gas station to be specific, a burglar was prowling around. This person, who was dressed up in a pilot-style jumpsuit and a bandana, walked into the store and told the clerk to put her hands up. This person then demanded cash from the register, and the clerk handed it over fairly swiftly. One strange aspect of the case was that the robber didn't have a weapon and never even claimed to. The most strange aspect, though, was the disguise. Much like Matthew and Joey, this person had drawn on a beard with a permanent marker. The robber then hopped back into their car and sped off south down the highway. Without much to go on, the police took to Twitter to post about their suspect. They originally described the person as being a white male in his 30s or 40s with long dark hair and a heavyset build. However, it wasn't too long before they revised their statement, noting that while they did assume the suspect was a man, they didn't actually know for sure. They said, "We are still looking for tips and the suspect may be a male or a female." The strangest aspect about this case is that the disguise might have actually worked. The suspect in this case was never actually caught. However, it's more likely that this wasn't due to the fake beard and more due to the fact that this was a random highway robbery with very little photo and video evidence to go on. This could have just been a random person on the highway on a long trip who went far away afterwards and never looked back. We don't only have a beard, we also have the case of Mustache Lady. Out in Boston, a robbery was taking place at the Webster First Federal Credit Union. In broad daylight, at about 1 p.m., a woman entered into the bank and handed the teller a note, threatening to end her life if she didn't hand over some cash. She was described as being a white woman, around 20 to 30, who was wearing glasses and a blue hoodie. More interestingly, she had drawn a mustache on her face with an ink pen while doing nothing to hide any of her other feminine traits. Much like in the previous case though, it seems that this woman actually did get away with it. When the police took to the internet to try and find out who this person was, they didn't really end up getting any good tips. This is most likely not because of the mustache. I mean, it's barely even visible in most of the photos. It was more likely due to the fact that nobody recognized her. She probably just lucked out. The president of the credit union wasn't too bent out of shape about it. He said that he was just happy that nobody was hurt. Moving away from pens and markers, we also have the strange story of Casey G. Kazi. Casey was a 25-year-old man living in Ashland, Kentucky. He was a pretty heavily tattooed guy, the kind of look you would expect for a robber. Likely knowing that he would need some sort of disguise to hide this easily identifiable look, he decided to use a very simple tool, duct tape. Wrapping the tape around his whole head, he left a portion open for his eyes and mouth. Confident that he would succeed in the crime this way, he approached a local liquor store. He entered into the store and threatened to injure the clerk inside if she didn't pay up. So she did. Another employee, though, wasn't having it. When Casey left the store, this other employee chased him down, beat him up with a baseball bat, and held him there in a chokehold until the police showed up. The police arrived and found that Casey didn't even have a weapon in the first place. Not only that, but his duct tape was very easy to remove as it had gotten pretty loose from all the sweat. It wasn't too long before Casey became a local, even national spectacle. He was labeled as the duct tape bandit and typically ended up on any top 10 dumbest criminals list that you might come across. In an interview from jail, Casey proclaimed his innocence, despite the mountain of evidence against him, photos of him in the duct tape, and being caught in the act.
They call you the duct tape bandit. That's not you?
Look at me. Do I look like a duct tape bandit, baby? I'm not no duct tape bandit, you hear me? Live one-on-one, Ashland, Kentucky, you know this is not me. Now look, do the math, do the homework, man.
However, Casey came to change his tone not too long after. He pled guilty to a charge of second-degree robbery. After a plea deal, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. This is because he also admitted to robbing a businessman in an alleyway 6 months before as well. He's now in the Kentucky State Reformatory, eligible for parole on August 8, 2025. Still, even when he gets out for that, he's going to have to return to Ohio. This is because he was actually on parole there for another burglary while he committed this one. So whenever he does get out, he's going to have to go back and complete the remainder of his sentence there as well. This brings us to someone even dumber than Casey, that being David Springthorpe. David was a habitual shoplifter in Alfreton in the UK. While we don't know the true extent of his thievery, we do know of a few items that he stole. He stole several perfume and gift sets from a store called Boots, as well as some steak from a local co-op store. Dumb as hell and high on crack, David continued to swipe different items here and there. While doing so, he felt that he had come up with a perfect disguise. Taking a page right out of a Superman comic, he simply put on a pair of glasses. Feeling that nobody would ever be able to find out his true identity, he would steal from the shops and then put on some glasses after he left. He was fully confident that his disguise was impeccable, leisurely walking down the sidewalk with zero fear that the cops were on his trail. Much to his dismay, the cops found him very quickly. After all, he had just left the store and casually walked away. After the police arrested him, they posted his mugshot online, both with and without the glasses. Internet users quickly began to clown on him, mocking his disguise. In the end though, he wasn't hit that hard. A judge fined him £80 and ordered him to pay £20 in compensation, 30 more as a victim surcharge, and £85 in court costs. While duct tape and glasses at least are not transparent, that wouldn't be the case when it came to Jamie Neal and Gareth Tilley. Still in the UK, Cornwall to be exact, we have the story of Jamie Neal, a 41-year-old criminal, and his miscreant accomplice, 20-year-old Gareth Tilley. Both having been a part of various burglaries in the past, the two decided that they wanted to rob a store together once more. So they set out on their journey, getting plenty high on some stolen prescription medication and drunk on alcohol along the way. Realizing that they hadn't thought about disguises, the two men realized that they needed to think quickly. Gareth, realizing that you actually need to hide your face, snatched the scarf and wrapped it around his head. Jamie, though, a bit on the dumber side, picked up a completely transparent plastic bag and put it over his head. Not only was his whole face completely visible, he was also having trouble breathing. Jamie held his phone up at a worker, claiming that it was a gun despite it being plainly visible. The two men then demanded money from the cashier. Things quickly fell into chaos when the woman hit the alarm button. Jamie then headbutted her in the face before briefly wrestling with her. The cashier, though, gave him a pretty good beating. The scuffle ended with both the men grabbing several bottles of booze and running out of the store. The police came out and checked the security camera footage from the store, seeing Jamie there in all of his glory. Only 2 days later, an off-duty detective just happened to spot him while out and about, calling for backup and arresting him. Jamie quickly squealed on Gareth, leading to him being arrested as well. The detective on the case told the media that the disguise was the most ridiculous one he had ever come across in his entire career. The two men's trials eventually came about. Jamie was convicted on a robbery charge and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Gareth, who appears to have been a drifter, was lucky enough to secure himself a room and was sentenced to 2 years himself. Believe it or not, we have a very similar but even dumber case. This being the case of Patrick S. McGuire. In East St. Louis, we have the story of a 49-year-old man, Patrick S. McGuire, who was a career criminal. Living in one of the most dangerous parts of St. Louis, Patrick had at least 14 felony charges under his belt along with over 30 misdemeanors. One judge said that this was, quote, the most extensive criminal history I have ever seen. Patrick, though, was even dumber than Jamie. He also decided to put a clear plastic bag over his head, but he did it in a way where the upper half of his face wasn't even inside the bag at all. Making his way into a local Circle K gas station, he put another plastic bag over an object in his hand and moved towards the clerk. He demanded money, getting a measly $60 from the register. He then fled the scene. It goes without saying that Patrick's lackluster disguise and the fact that the police knew him pretty well at this point led to a quick arrest. To make things even worse, Patrick hadn't even been out on probation for 2 weeks from his last felony when he was hit with the charges. In his trial, Patrick was sentenced to 15.5 years in prison for his robbery. The judge hoped that he would go without parole for a significantly longer period of time this time around, saying, "I don't think I've seen a case where there's a stronger need to protect the public." And now we have a case that I've saved for last, and this is because I'm not sure if it's one of the worst costumes ever, or if it's one of the best. This is the case of the human tree, James Coldwell. In the town of Manchester in Pennsylvania, a 49-year-old man named James Coldwell decided that he wanted to go rob a bank. He felt that he had the perfect disguise in mind. He got to work crafting his costume. To do so, he duct-taped a bunch of leafy tree branches all over his body. James made his way out to the Citizens Bank on Elm Street right around when it opened. Even though there weren't any plants in the bank, real or fake, he thought he would blend in pretty perfectly. Having no weapon, he waited in line in his tree suit. He gradually made his way up to the teller. There he demanded money, got a bit of cash, and simply left. The police came out to the scene very quickly and got to work with the K-9 unit, all set to track James down. Unfortunately, the dog wasn't able to get a good scent and they couldn't find him. That didn't last too long, though. As soon as James made the local news right after, one of his neighbors recognized him and called the police. The police came out to his house and arrested him, finding out that he didn't even live 1 mile away from the bank. He was flabbergasted that the police were able to identify him despite his disguise. His neighbors all laughed as he was taken off to jail. A detective said of the case, he really went out on a limb. James was hit with the charge of robbery. All the money that he had stolen in the heist was recovered from his house and given back to the bank. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. If you found the video interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. This was a bit different from the usual kind of video. I mean, by the end, nobody even died, so it's a bit of a break for people who've been watching the pretty horrible ones lately. If you want to check it out, I have a merch store open. There you can get yourself some cool Dire Trip t-shirts and all sorts of other stuff. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. If you ever need to get a hold of me for anything, that's the easiest way. I also really appreciate when people subscribe to my Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you get the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.